what point did you decide to make this film? Was there a specific moment during filming when you realized this would become a personal documentary, or was the intention clear from the beginning? So we'll start by responding to the second question before the...
Introducing the film We Are Inside by Farah Kassem stands as a compelling example of contemporary personal cinema from the region. The film moves between conventional documentary structures, engaging instead with subjectivity, memory, and fragmented narrative forms. By foregrounding an intimate perspective, it reflects broader artistic tendencies in Levantine experimental filmmaking, where personal experiences become a space of aesthetic exploration and critical reflection. So enjoy the show.
What I want to say for the project is thank you, first of all, for inviting the film to be screened at your venue. And I think this is extremely important to have these acts, of creating community, around the film, and it's very, very much needed today, and it's very much needed outside of structure, of like to have these movements and these moments just like coming up everywhere. And I think that what you're doing is unique, and that you must keep on doing it. The first question is, would you consider this film experimental? In what ways does it break traditional storytelling patterns? How does the way the story unfolds reflect the real experience of the director, especially her life between Tripoli and abroad, and her complex relationship with her father? Okay. So I would start by saying that I never thought about the film as an experimental format, because I didn't even think about the language of the film before really starting trying things out. What I knew, which is something that I like to work with when I'm making films, is to create certain numbers of limitations that guides me throughout the process. So for me, it was very clear that I wanted to film from within, inside of these interiors, to kind of go from one interior to another, to actually reflect also on the idea of space and this thing that we have in Lebanon, I think in many other countries, which is this complicated relationship with public space and how we relate to the public. So this intersection between the private and the public, and the windows always having this element in the foreground and in the background defining the space. How these barriers between these two spaces, what does it do? How do they dialogue amongst each other? So I think by having the intention and these limitations, also like the idea of filming 4:3, this is something that I discussed from the beginning with the cinematographer of the film, because we wanted to actually think about space in a vertical way, because we knew that we're going to film at the Poetry Club, and we wanted to fragment that communal sense in order to be present in it in a different way, to understand what it is made of. So these were elements that were important for us. And then, as we filmed, things started happening. And I think this is, for me, the beauty of the documentary film, or actually just the beauty of dealing with reality and just trying to translate it into something. For example, the pigeon was an element that came out of nowhere, and just because I think back then I was really attentive, I was really present, I was really listening, that I felt that there is a dialogue happening between, like a post-human dialogue that is happening here, and that could be a reflection of a third dimension beyond the private and the public, like this element that comes to me the moment I come back to my city, and that actually gives me an idea to start writing my first poem. So I wouldn't call the film necessarily experimental, but I would say that it's a film that is made of many different layers that don't necessarily make sense if we think about them in a separate way. But for me, they created the symphony and the complexity of what it means to live in that space in that moment of time. You know, what does it mean to have a revolution going outside when you have a doctor reciting poetry to a sick man, and then somebody who's rethinking wine and identity and very troubled by it, you know, and incapable to speak, and at the same time watching the news all the time. Like the complexity of the act of living by itself. And I think this is what I wanted to do in this film, to be able to be able to show these different, to visit these different facets while being rooted in the everyday, and not really looking for. I was not thinking about it in a way where I was looking for like a peak in the narration or anything. It was more of being present and dialoguing with reality as I filmed, and allowing myself to get inspired by it to continue.
Next question.
At what point did you decide to make this film? Was there a specific moment during filming when you realized this would become a personal documentary, or was the intention clear from the beginning? So we'll start by responding to the second question before the. I mean, when I make films, I usually my point of view is always present. I am somebody who I personally find it difficult to just enter a space and film without revealing my point of view and my gaze, because I feel that there's a lot in that, and this baggage that defines what I'm filming, why I'm filming it, and that defines how people react to my presence and the presence of my camera and my sound equipment and all of that. So all my films are, they start from this personal point of view, because I also need for myself an excuse of why I am present in that space. I find it difficult to just go somewhere where, like, I feel that for myself, I feel like there's some extraction in doing that and just going somewhere and not having this organic relation to the place or to the people. So a question that crosses my mind when I want to make a film is like, would I go there in an organic way? Would I ever be in that space without the need or the wish or the desire to make a film? And this is something that kind of guides my methods. So I'm there in all my films, and not because I like to be in front of the camera, but because I think that I like to start from that specific place and then go somewhere else, and then allow myself to dive into the encounter. But I cannot talk about the encounter or experience it if I'm not positioning myself, and positionality is very important. But I don't necessarily look to make films that are specifically revealing the profoundness of my emotions, which is I'm not saying that this is not present in my film, but it's always an invitation to meet the other, I would say. So when did I decide to make this film? So I was living abroad for a long time, and then I went back home, and me and my dad were watching a TV, like a news TV thing, you know, where they invite politicians and then they fight on TV, and every time they fight on TV, we fight inside of the house, you know, watching the TV. And I'm like, how could you vote for these people? No, like, you don't know, you haven't experienced the Civil War, you haven't experienced this. Yeah, but so what? Our generation is here to change all of that. Back then, hopeful thinking. And so every time we spoke about politics or about how I relate to the city, how I relate to the political scene, we would go into fights. And we are very good friends. Like, we enjoy each other and we enjoy spending time together. And then when we'd fight, it would become very extreme. No, I don't want to talk to you, no. And then I would go to my room, I would close the door, and then I would sit there, and then the next day in the morning, or a couple of hours after, he knocks on my door, and he opens the door and he tells me, have I read you my latest poem, my daughter? So poetry was also a negotiation of peace, and he would take, and he wouldn't even wait for my answer. He would just take the paper, na 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 na, da 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 da, reading his poetry, and I wouldn't understand a word, you know. But I was just amazed by seeing my father so like being brought to life by every sentence, every verse, every word, every melody, and I was just taken by his body movement, you know. The fact that poetry was keeping him alive in a certain way. And the first film we made together, he was reading his poetry because he would take any opportunity to read his poetry as I was filming. And here in that film, what I did was that I removed the sound completely, so you'd only see him doing this, and I would use the sound to bring an off-frame scene. But here, I think that I was finally ready to try to understand. I was finally ready to make that move of realizing that he's getting old, he will be gone, and I will never have the chance to really understand what moves him. What is he saying in this poetry? And for me, this is when I really decided that I wanted to understand. And back then he told me, well, you know what, since you're here and you're not doing anything, come with me to the poetry club, come film us a bit. They will be happy to archive their poetry. And this is when I went to the poetry club and I met all these men, all above 70, bringing all this pastry, you know, and they're all diabetic, you know, and eating this pastry as they read their verses. And for me, it was amazing because there was this semicircle with all these books around them, because also like they were meeting at an attorney's office, so the law was there, like all these books about the law, and the window, and a revolution, like the country collapsing and the start of something. So for me, to see this generation that was very politically engaged, very active, very politicized, and who decided after the Civil War to just drop everything aside and to be in that corner and kind of preserve in a way the remains of something, the ruins of something, and to be completely disengaged from the outside, because engaging with the outside meant engaging with their defeat. When I saw that, I was extremely moved, and it made me think a lot about how I am reacting, like how is that working, you know, how am I reacting to the outside? Who does it belong to actually? Or who has a place in it, you know, and for what reasons? So this is when I decided to join the club, and realizing that actually the only thing that matters for him is poetry. So how could I speak to him? It has to be through poetry. It has to be through the subject that he cherishes the most, and that is poetry. And this is when I decided to join the club and film since he wanted me to film, and then things grew along the way.
Okay.
Third question. During the poetry gatherings, you mentioned that you did not fully understand what was being said. Do you think the poetic language, with all its metaphors, reflects or even overshadows the hopes of people who feel unable to change their reality? Does poetry become a refuge, or does it deepen the sense of resignation? Well, I feel that we are in the Arab world, and this is maybe very general when I say the Arab world, because each country is very different from the other, and we relate to things in a different way. I would say that we like metaphors. We love metaphors. We cannot exist without metaphors, because that's the only way to translate reality. And the oral history is very important. Like oral history is something that is transmitted. Like I know from my grandmother and my dad's mother, his grandfather, like people used to sit together and just recite what they knew and enjoy the repetition of the recital, the familiarity of a poem, the familiarity of a verse, and find meaning every time they would recite it again and again, you know. And I think this is beautiful, and this is what I try to do in this film, like the repetition itself. What kind of meanings does it bring every time, and what kind of meaning making does it induce? So I think that we need metaphors to be able to digest what is not tangible, what cannot be said. But I also think that they have a conversation in the film about can poetry be politically engaged? Like, can it be political? Is it only aesthetic? And I think this is something that's, yeah, I personally don't have, I cannot speak on their behalf because I don't know how they evolved. I knew my father's poetry in the last 10 years, but I knew that in the past he talked about love, but then he talked about identity, about unity, about Palestine. He even made a poem about the river of Barada, and then he talked about the revolution of 2005, and then he decided not to write anything anymore about anything in the Arab world. And then he started talking about the flowers and his village, and then he made a poem about his mother, and he passed away. And I think this tells a lot about how we perceive urgency with time. Like, these big ideas, at some point they decompose, or they change, and they become, like, the sense of belonging changes, and then I think a poem about his mother meant the world for him. And again, I think in the act of poetry, it's again this thing about the intersection between the private, the political private, and not only, like, there's a lot of politics within that. And there was somebody that I met at a festival in Tunis who told me something that really stuck with me, which is that he told me that your father needed this horizontal form, the vertical poem. You know, he needed this form of verticality. You know, the form itself, the structure, how it rhymes, the rhythm. Like the poem that is on a certain, call it the meters of poetry, because he could only liberate himself by being rooted within a structure. And I think for him to be able to allow this metamorphose that he speaks about at some point, this was only possible if he was rooted, and the verticality of the poem permitted that. And for me, it was the opposite. Like, for me, it was the form of like, if you want to think about this film in a poetic form, really, of poetry itself, it's more like, it's nether. How do you translate nether? Prose. And it starts somewhere, it goes somewhere else, it comes back, and then you're just floating around something, and then as you float, you find the thread. So I think that these separate movements are interesting to look at, and look how it guided our works, whether his or mine.
Use of the archive, I was interested in seeing it showing up at the very end of the movie, where you usually use it to give context at the beginning rather than almost as a conclusion. What is the intention?
I always love the scene. It's a scene from my cousin who came back from Australia after 10 years, like this, like typical migrations return, you know, stories. And he was met with rice, and the entire village coming to say hello, thinking that he made lots of money, but you know, it's usually not the case. I love this scene because it was a specific times. It was the 90s, and back then Lebanon in the 90s, was a different country from. But that's not the reason why I used it. Why I used it is because I felt that his death is communal. He left with the community carried his body took him out of the door, but he also danced with community. He lived with community and he danced with community. And through the poetry club, he was looking for community. And for me, it was about the sense of belonging within a group. And this dance of death, but it's this dance of joy, this dance of and this idea of looking back, you know, like when you see him after he's looking back, you see him that he already died, you don't understand what he's looking really at, you know. And this, yeah, wanting to play with time and play with our perception of time and how we archive memory and how we, you know, how we approach memory. Yeah, I think for that. يلا خلاص.
Thanks, Farah.